Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You all look delightful tonight. Welcome to the Victory Theater's Bare Bones production of Backstory, an evening of true stories, poetry, and flights of fancy. I'm Rashim, and I'll be your host. But first, let me get out of this thing. That mask is part of a new diet I was trying, but I feel so strange when I have it on. This month's theme, Silence of the Lambs. For those who have seen the film, you'll know that my entrance tonight was a tribute to one of the great fictional horror characters in recent American history, Hannibal Lecter. Or the late, great Hannibal Lecter. As he was described by one of the most horrific real-life characters in recent American history. Hannibal Lecter is a gentleman, refined, educated, a doctor in fact, but he has one noteworthy flaw. He likes to eat people. And I don't mean he enjoys oral sex. No, Lecter finds pleasure in consuming human flesh, evidently at times with one of his favorite side dishes and a good pairing wine. That's pretty sick, right? Eating people, devouring human flesh. It's disturbing, so far outside of normal human behavior. Or is it? Have you ever nibbled a sweetheart's ear? Put your teeth on the skin of a lover's shoulder? I mean, you don't apply pressure, not much. Or maybe you do at times, whatever you're both into. Many of us do it, but why do we do it? Why do we have the desire to give those little love bites? And how then is the line between love and lunch? One of the lines of dialogue that I've always found most interesting in the film comes just after Lecter escapes by cutting, beating, and biting the officers who are guarding him. Clarice is talking to her friend, Ardelia, played by the multi-talented Casey Lemons, who later became one of my favorite directors. In the scene, Ardelia is concerned about the well-being of Clarice, and Clarice assures her, "He won't come after me. He would consider that rude." I think we can all agree that eating someone is rather rude. While nibbling on a shoulder can be truly tantalizing, actually eating someone's flesh is downright disrespectful. At that point, you've crossed over from sharing your hunger and desire for them to selfishly satisfying your own appetite with no regard for them. You've reduced them to a piece of meat. We've all heard such a phrase, haven't we? I felt like a piece of meat. He treated me like a piece of meat. They look at me like I'm a piece of meat. That is the less talked about theme in The Silence of the Lambs, but it is there every bit as much as that of cannibalism. Clarice Starling was in a man's world, and the male gaze was heavy and constant. Director Jonathan Demme was overt and intentional in his demonstration of that hungry gaze following Clarice throughout the film. He had many of the actors stare directly into the camera so that we could feel their eyes and Clarice's discomfort, an extra affliction she had to deal with as she did the stressful and strenuous job of solving the case and saving Catherine Martin's life. And no man was innocent of it. From her boss and mentor, Jack Crawford, to the director of the sanitarium who immediately made a pass at Clarice, though she was there in a professional capacity, to other FBI trainees who would turn their head 180 degrees to watch as Clarice and Ardelia jogged by as part of their own training. And yes, to Hannibal Lecter himself, whose gaze upon Clarice is so intense that it's become part of cinema legend. But what sets Lecter apart is that, though he is undoubtedly taken by Clarice, unlike most of the other men, she was more than just her flesh to him. Still, he crossed the line at times saying inappropriate things, as we men are often apt to do. And Clarice called him on it, at one point chiding, "It's the sort of thing Miggs would say." You may remember Miggs, his Lecter's cell neighbor. He's the one who greeted Clarice by telling her that he could smell her lady parts. Hannibal Lecter wanted to know Clarice. He trusted her, and he respected her enough to believe that she would solve his riddles and ultimately capture Buffalo Bill. Now, Buffalo Bill didn't have the same etiquette as Dr. Lecter. Bill, who was not a transsexual, which was stated clearly in the movie, was a deranged man who hated himself and wanted to change into something different. And in his twisted mind, that meant changing into a woman. And so a woman who crossed his path, if she was of a certain size, could serve his purpose and help him satisfy his desire. It rubs the lotion on its skin. It, the slab of meat, the flesh, or more specifically the skin that satisfies his needs. Bill mimics Catherine as she screams out from his dungeon. She screams out like the lambs that Clarice wanted to save from the farm. Their screams disturbed her because she heard screams of a being she cared about, a being worth saving. But to the farmers, the lambs were meat, so the screams could be ignored. Like the testimony of a woman, a professor, at the hearing of a prospective Supreme Court justice who sexually assaulted her when she was young. Like the account of a woman, a journalist, in a court that found a president liable for sexually abusing her while his support doesn't wane. Like the many screams of women, every profession, every race, every age, calling out not to be saved, but to be respected as more than meat. Clarice never screamed in the film, not through the training, not through the gruesome discoveries, not through her dealing with the deranged men or with the serial killers. She knew there was no point. Jodie Foster tried to secure the rights for the book, The Silence of the Lambs, well before she played Clarice Starling. When she learned that the rights had already been purchased by the production company Orion, she lobbied hard for the role. She had to meet with Jonathan Demme multiple times before he understood that she was the one to play Clarice. In an interview she did with the British Film Institute, Foster says, "The reason that I lobbied for it was because I had in my whole life been playing a lot of victims. So I've been playing a lot of women that had been acted upon. And that is a big part of women's history. A large part of our history has been about being acted upon. And there was a sort of healing process to finally playing a woman who saves the other women. And that woman sees a reflection of herself in the women she's trying to save." Jodie Foster won her second Oscar for her portrayal of Clarice Starling, a woman who had to navigate this world of men, some being very powerful, some being keepers of the gates she needed to open in order to do her job. And so she did, even as many of the men continued to be rude.